Welcome to the Work in Progress podcast. This is a space where we want to create conversations around things that actually matter. We hope these words encourage you to know that no matter where we are in our journeys, we're all still a work in progress.
What's up? Welcome back to season 2, episode 1, Work in Progress podcast. We are back. It is a new year. We're excited to kick off another year doing the podcast. Actually, welcome to those who maybe it's your first time watching. We know that we have made a ton of connections over the past couple of weeks. We have people that are watching checking this out for the first time ever. So if that's you, welcome to the podcast. We're glad you're here.
What's your name?
Oh, my name is Daniel. That's not really that important.
Intro yourself, bro.
It's not that important.
My name's Daniel. My name's Aaron.
Yeah, welcome. Daniel, Aaron, welcome. This is a podcast service of Awaken Church. And so if you're in the Round Rock, Austin, Georgetown area, we'd love to see you on a Sunday. So roll through and come and check it out. Also, something new this season is we are only YouTube exclusive.
That's right.
So if you're watching this, that's the only way you can get it. So you're watching it on YouTube. So no longer on Spotify, no big deal because you're watching it on YouTube, so it doesn't matter.
That's right.
Okay, so Spotify no more. YouTube exclusive.
There we go.
They gain the exclusive rights. So shout out to our partner YouTube for making it happen.
YouTube sponsors.
I wish. Hey, so we're going to talk about a ton of things over the next couple of weeks and months. As a matter of fact, we had a great roundtable not that long ago where we actually sat and just started getting ideas with some young adults and some young adult leaders in our church. And so that's the product that you're going to have over the next couple of weeks. And like we always say, if you have something that you want to talk about, man, shoot us a DM, comment, message. We're not that hard to reach. So we want to know what you want to talk about.
That's the whole point of the show, right? We want to talk about what's relatable to you guys. And so give us topics, man. Give us what you're going through.
Season 2, new venue, hanging out in Aaron's house,
his
office studio. Shout out to the AV Media behind me.
That's right.
So welcome. Here we go. Let's just dive right into new season.
Yeah, man.
First topic. We should have pulled him out of a hat, man, and made it more like suspenseful.
I know, just had one in there.
That's right, more suspenseful. Go ahead, man. Just tell me you were in the meeting, so just kind of tell me like where this came from, and then let's hop in.
Yeah. So we hosted a think tank brainstorming session with a lot of the people who are in the church and new to the church, want to get involved with the young adults, and want to help grow this community. Really, essentially, is all it was. So we all just pitched in our thoughts, our ideas, things we would like to see, things we would like to hear. And so we came up with a lot of different ideas and topics for the podcast. And one of them was specifically talking about the transition really into any new season, right? Whether that's graduating high school, going to college, or not going to college and just starting into the workforce, or graduating college, going straight to the workforce, moving to a new city, a new town, a new state. Any of those seasons in life, there comes a period of time where you're just vulnerable.
Yeah,
you don't know anybody. It's a fresh start. You might have one or two friends, but you really don't know anybody. And so there's a season of life that just comes with that natural vulnerability, right? For everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. You will experience this at some point in your life if you haven't already. So we're just going to dive into that topic a little bit and go a little deeper.
Yeah, let's talk about vulnerability, right? Nobody, I don't think, really likes to admit or be in this space. But like I said, it happens to everybody.
Yeah.
And so like what we want to do is talk about like where do you see it in scripture? Like why is it important to be vulnerable? Why do we need to be that? And so we talked about this a lot last season, but where do we start? We want to start with Jesus, right? And so immediately when the topic of vulnerability came up, it takes me to Jesus in the garden before he's crucified, Matthew 26.
Yeah.
Right. And Jesus is in this very vulnerable state. He knows what's coming. Not only does he know he's going to die, he knows he's going to die like a pretty horrific way to die. Like this is painful. Like he knows what he's about to go through, the pain he's about to go through. And he gets to this place in the garden where he is completely vulnerable with his closest friends and completely vulnerable with God. Right. And so Jesus is the example, and we want to live like Jesus. I think he's laying out for us here this perfect example of being vulnerable. I don't know, maybe it's something like as men, maybe we struggle more with. I know that I struggle with personally being vulnerable, allowing people in. But I see like Jesus' example of like, man, in his deepest, darkest moment, he's inviting people in to his vulnerability. right? He's talking to Peter and is like, man, I know what's coming. I know this cup that is coming for me. Like, will you be here and pray? Like, will you be with me and stay here with me, right? Yeah. It's powerful to be Jesus, Son of God, walking on earth, and yet inviting people into this vulnerable space. And so I think one right there is the example Jesus gives is being vulnerable with people and being vulnerable with God.
Yeah.
And I think as we start this conversation, one, it's okay to be vulnerable. Obviously, Jesus did it. But yeah, like being vulnerable with people and God, it's a twofold thing.
Yeah, right? I agree, man. And it's so humbling to just know that Jesus walked through a lot of the things that we walk through. That's crazy. Like if you really think about that, like Jesus in human form, just like nervous probably, right? Like worried, like, oh my gosh, I know this is coming. I feel so exposed. And so thanks for starting with that. That's a really good starting point. I did want to, like, I was looking this up as we were researching for the podcast, and I was just like, what is the definition of vulnerability? So the definition of, according to Oxford, says the quality or state of being exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed either physically or emotionally. And I'm like, dang, man, that's crazy. You know, when you really look into what words mean and you get beyond like that initial layer, that initial idea that you thought that it might have meant, then it just exposes a whole new concept of, wow, like vulnerability is just one of the craziest feelings you can have. The feeling of being exposed or open to harm, dude, that is nuts. Yeah. That is absolutely nuts.
Yeah. And I think like when I think of vulnerability, there's like a really famous TED Talk by Brene Brown that like got a lot of traction. She's written all about it, right? And her big thing is like, it takes courage to be vulnerable. And I think like that's what you see in this like moment with Jesus is being courage. He's filled with courage because he's inviting people in to his most vulnerable spaces. Right? So I think the first question as we talk about vulnerability is, do you have the courage to invite people in? Like that's the first thing. Do you have courage to say, hey, I'm not okay? Yeah. Will you walk with me? Will you pray with me? Will you mentor me? Whatever it is, right? Yeah. And then I think when you get past that stage, right, the secular world, like it's like, yeah, vulnerability is courage, like being vulnerable with people. I think being vulnerable with God and admitting like, I mean, he obviously already knows it, right? But I think when you get to the space where you're willing to admit your vulnerability with God, it allows God to work in your life. Like, right?
Exactly.
We were talking about it before the podcast. I think it's a pretty good example, right? Like when you go and work out, if you're not uncomfortable, you're probably not going to see many gains, right? If you're not pushing yourself to be vulnerable, right? Even in working out, like, right? Knowing that I may not be able to get this weight up, so I need help. Right. When you're going and you're running and like, you know what, I'm putting myself out there, right? That's when you start seeing real gains, like, right, in your physical nature is when you're vulnerable. I think the same thing happens spiritually. Like you won't actually see gains spiritually until you allow people in and you are vulnerable with God and let him, like, admitting I don't have it all together. I am recognizing I don't have it all together. God, this only happens if you do it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the cool thing about just our faith in general, man, because I think it's crazy how so many things tie into this too, because when my mind goes to, first it goes to tithing, right? Because to me, tithing is a super vulnerable thing. Yeah. And also singing, like worshiping, right? Those two are the biggest things for me where I can be the most vulnerable. Yeah. I feel the most exposed and like, God, like I don't want to give this money because I know I need to pay my bills, but like I trust you, right? It's because if you think about it, God doesn't need your money. He doesn't need your praise, but he asked for those things because it opened you up to be vulnerable to him, right? And like we were talking about, 2 Corinthians 12:9 says, what does it say? It says, my power is made perfect in weakness, right? Yeah. And Pastor Ryan always says, if dependence is the goal, the weakness is the advantage, right? Yeah. And so it's a really cool thing how it's all kind of tied together, man. It's definitely challenging, man.
Yeah, and I think the key is like, so you're talking about like people in these transition periods of life. Like I think the key is that you have a choice to be vulnerable, right? You can put up the guard, you can put up this like, oh no, everything's good. Like I don't need help. Like emotionally I'm good, mentally I'm good, physically I'm good. But really that's only hurting like you. Yeah. Right. And that's the whole tricky thing about vulnerability, right? Like it's easy to put up the fence and be like, no, I'm good. And then you just have to just live suffering silently, right? Or you can be vulnerable, allow people in. Yeah, you're letting people in, which means they might hurt you because people do that. But what about the healing, or what about the joy, or what about like the encouragement you can actually get when you let people in? I know that's scary. Like that is scary. But the more you do it, I think the easier it becomes. Like allowing people in and being vulnerable, the easier it becomes.
It's kind of like taking a cold shower, taking an ice bath. You know what I mean? Like
I don't do that.
It may not be easier the next time, but you know the benefits that come out of it. You know. And I was thinking about this on my drive over here to my house, but I was thinking about this, man, and you really can't have a deep-rooted relationship without being vulnerable, right? And good. It's true and apparent with God, with the Father. It's also true in friendships, you know, like it made me think of our relationship when we first met. Like we were just kind of like, you know, hey, what's up on a Sunday? Then we started to get into this discipleship relationship, and slowly over time, we became more vulnerable with each other and like grew roots within a friendship, right? And now we break bread together all the time. Our families hang out. Our little babies are about to go hang out in the living room right now. It's crazy, man. Like, and if we hadn't started this relationship where we're both vulnerable at one point in time, I mean, who knows? Like, we might not be doing the podcast. You know what I'm saying? And so it's really cool to see, like, what happens and the blessings that come from the vulnerability, you know, because it is a risky thing. And I think that if you give it to God, as we were saying, like, he'll take care of you. Yeah. You know? Yeah,
I think I got, like, two thoughts. One is never happened to me, and I've seen it. I'm going to date myself a little bit. I don't know how many of you have ever watched the movie Coach Carter. One of my like favorite movies when I was in high school. Like, man, that's the jam, right? There's this character in there, right, who has to be vulnerable. Yeah, he has this exterior of like a tough guy and has to be vulnerable. Oh, dude, right? And I think of that. I think of like that scene where he stands up and he's like quoting, is it Nelson Mandela? Right? Is that right?
I think.
You know, about like shrinking away is only limiting your potential.
Yeah.
Like, right, it's actually standing up in the face of courage and being vulnerable and talking about, man, I'm not okay. That actually allows other people to shine, right? And so I think of that movie scene.
That's hilarious.
I think of that movie scene, but then it like spins me forward to about a year ago. I was actually preaching at a Disciple Now in a different town, and it's like I think it's the last night, and one of the girls comes up. We're doing like prayer time after one of the messages. Yeah, she comes up to me and we're like in a prayer room, right? And she's like, will you pray with me? I'm like, yeah, sure. What's going on? And she just starts like crying, like weeping, crying. And she's like, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. She keeps apologizing for crying. And I'm like, what are you sorry about? Right. And so she's like telling me like, well, you know, like I'm a senior. Like I've been here this whole time. And like, I know people look up to me and I'm here crying. And I was like, well, why are you sorry for that? And she's like, well, I'm crying, like, and they can see me crying. Right, and I'm like, don't you know how much power is in the fact that you, a senior, a leader, is like breaking down and crying and like processing these things, right? And she had a lot of stuff going on in her life. And so like that wasn't the point. The point was that she was willing to be vulnerable in a space where she knew people were watching her.
Scary.
Right? She knew that she was a leader as a senior. She knew that she had underclassmen and middle school kids like watching her, and she kept apologizing. I'm like, you don't have to apologize. Yeah. Like, and I told her, you don't know the impact that you crying and being vulnerable is actually having on those that are watching. Yeah. Right. I think that's the same thing for anybody who's in this transition season, who's in these moments where you could choose to be vulnerable and to stay locked up and to stay locked away, or you could choose to actually be vulnerable. You don't actually know who's watching you. Yeah. Right. You may be going through this transition. You're like, nobody's really knows who I am. Nobody's watching. You'd be surprised the power that you have by unleashing vulnerability. People are watching, and people are waiting for somebody oftentimes to be vulnerable before they actually step in and be vulnerable as well. Yeah. And you probably know this, like being life group leaders and stuff, like, right. It's amazing when somebody begins to be vulnerable, how the wave of vulnerability takes over a room. Yes. Like, right. You know, and I think of like student summer camp, right? Like we're in a room, we're always debriefing after stuff. Yeah. It just takes one. Like once one kid gets in and is vulnerable, man, like the floodgates are unleashed. And then, like we said earlier, God can actually begin to work in these people's lives because they're allowed themselves to be open, vulnerable, and broken. And so, man, I would just encourage, like if you're a young adult, like if you're listening to this and you're like, man, I have the choice to be vulnerable or I have the choice to stay behind my fence and like keep myself guarded. Not only is it good for you to be vulnerable, but imagine the ripple effect it'll have on your community. Absolutely. You allow yourself to be vulnerable. Man, that's like powerful stuff. Man.
It is powerful. I kept thinking of the word superpower. It is kind of like a superpower, you know, and I mean, you hit the nail on the head, dude. That's exactly what I was thinking is when one person opens the door to that, it gives other people permission, like subconsciously to just say, okay, they've kind of broken the ice. They can do it. I can do it. You know, it gives them that courage that's contagious. And then, like you said, God can do his work, man. It's super cool to see, and especially in a life group setting. Yeah. It's like, it changes people's lives. It's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, right, if we want to follow Jesus, we want to be like Jesus, we want to do how Jesus did. Jesus was vulnerable. Like he allowed people in. Mm-hmm. He was vulnerable with his relationship with God. Like he's crying out to God, there's any other way, please. Right. And so it makes us think that we don't have to do that.
Yeah, that's true, man.
Right. And so I think that's the encouragement. It's like, we want to be like Jesus, you got to be vulnerable. And the second part of that is like, once you are vulnerable, once you've opened yourself up to being vulnerable, man, watch what happens to your community around you. It just takes one. And maybe you're the one that unleashes the floodgates. And so I think that's the encouragement, man. Be vulnerable, press in, choose courage. It's not only life-changing for you, but could be life-changing for those that are around you.
Amen.
So
that's awesome, bro.
Cool. I think we're going to try really hard to stay in our time limit. And so I think like that's probably a pretty good piece to the vulnerability conversation. Yeah. If you've not been with us before, we'd like to end our podcast on a fun note, a positive note. Did you even look anybody up? I bet you didn't. Come on, bro. We end with the creative corner, and we're literally in a corner. So it's a creative corner. Put in the corner over here. And so what we like to do is we just like to give a couple of shout outs at the end to people who are doing some great creative work. And so I'm going to go first because I have mine already. We have got connected with a graphic designer on Instagram who did our graphics for our upcoming Disciple Now and for our sermon series with our students. And she was awesome. So if there's anybody out there looking for a graphic designer, Michelle K Graphics on Instagram, go check out her stuff. It's fire. As a matter of fact, if you've heard of the Jesus Loves You company, like they're everywhere, like they make all the shirts and bags and all that stuff. She just did their last drop. So they dropped, they did a graffiti drop. She did all the work. Oh, wow. I mean, she's legit. So go check her stuff out. Awesome to work with. That's awesome. Great company. Like she's awesome. So go check her stuff out and hire her to do your graphic needs.
That's sick, bro.
There you go. There's mine.
Yeah, and you thought I didn't have one.
Look one up right now, real quick. Let's see.
I got it already pulled up, bro. I did it earlier. So mine is not necessarily somebody accessible to people around the world. This is a local gym in Georgetown here. It's called Build Your Better Fitness. And they're a local gym. They do like CrossFit style workouts, and they have other like free weights and stuff where you can do whatever you want. But it's a Christian backed company, right? So the owners are both believers, and they run a really cool operation. And I actually just got hit up by them, so maybe we'll be doing some collabs soon. But man, like, it's cool. He actually reached out to me because he's like, "Hey, I saw that you posted one of your videos and you mentioned God," and he's like, "I just want to say that's awesome." So like, okay, cool, man. Like, he appreciated that, so that's awesome. Cool. Shout out to them, man.
That's awesome. I have to go check them out.
Yeah,
see if they can come out and do an event for us or something.
Yeah, that'd be sick.
Oh, all right.
There we go. All
right, so this is episode 1. We are wrapping up season 2, episode 1. Since we're only on YouTube now, you have to like, subscribe.
Yep.
Is that it? I don't know how YouTube works.
You can probably share it with your friends.
Share it. There you go. Boom. Invite somebody in, and if you've got ideas or things, share with us. If this challenged you or encouraged you, man, share it. That's the whole goal, right? Like, it's not something that we want to keep to ourselves. We want to actually share it. And so do that. Do all the things.
That's it. All right.
That's it.
See you in the next episode.
See ya.